All right, good morning, I guess it is still. I'm Larkin Eggleston, Chair of the Safe Communities Committee, and we are going to jump right in. We have got a very long agenda today. We have moved some things up, adjusted some things at the request of Councilmember Johnson and a few others. So we're going to be trying to tackle a lot of stuff in a little time. So I would encourage people, as always, make your remarks as succinctly as possible and don't feel the need to repeat each other. I know we've got one of our committee members has already alerted me they've got a 1:30 meeting. Let's hope this doesn't take 2.5 hours, but the sooner we get started, the sooner we can get finished and get them to their next meeting. So if we can start with introductions. I've already introduced myself, Mr. Vice Chair.
James Mitchell, Vice Chair.
Our other committee members that are joining us virtually.
Good morning, Renee Johnson, Council Member and Committee Member.
Ms. Johnson, I hope that car is not moving. Ms. Watlington.
Victoria Watlington, District 3 and Committee.
Any other council members that have joined us? I see one.
Ed Driggs, District 7.
Hello, Matt Newton, District 5.
All right, staff.
Lena James. Good morning, Lena James, City Attorney's Office.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
Angela Charles, City Manager's Office.
Deputy Chief Stella Patterson, CMP.
Patrick Baker, City Attorney.
Stephanie Kelly, City Clerk's Office.
All right.
Chief Donnie Jennings is Venus.
Rebecca Hefner, Innovation and Technology.
All right, and then any other presenters we've got with us today? I see a couple of our input group members.
Robert Dawkins from the input group.
Anya Jameson from the input group.
Mr. Dawkins wins Best Zoom Background Award today. I believe that was everybody. So thank you all for joining us, and let's jump right into an agenda overview with Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Vice Chair, members of the committee. As the Chair said earlier, we do have a pretty comprehensive agenda today, but by design, we would have a comprehensive agenda. There are a number of items that we're trying to cover in the month of August. And today we will have feedback from the community input group and Federico, who did a great job the last time we were together. We'll talk a little bit about that process and that process going forward. On the agenda, we have, much like we had teed up last time, police recruitment and training, 8 Can't Wait, the roles of the Civil Service Board and the Citizens Review Board, next steps, and then what we would do in terms of upcoming topics, which would include, again, still being in the month of August, consideration for the 8 Can't Wait, the roles of the Citizens Review Board and Civil Service Board. We would continue to have report outs from the community input group, and then we would begin the discussions of the review of the rules of conduct, as well as passive protests, peaceful demonstrations and First Amendment activities. So again, today the design is to have a bit of a deep dive into police recruitment and training in the 8 Can't Wait, as well as our first discussion about the roles of the CSB and the Citizens Review Board. So with that said, Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, and I'll note the Vice Chair and I talked about this earlier and wanted to go ahead and point it out before the question is likely asked by someone else. You'll see on your agenda today we have not predicted are taking any votes today, and that's not for a lack of urgency. It is an acknowledgement of the fact that anything that's coming out of this committee as a recommendation as we go through this work will be brought to the full city council at a strategy session. Because there are obviously issues that the full council is going to want to weigh in on. We want to give them the opportunity to do that and to ask questions and have those questions answered, and that's best done in a strategy session. So with that in mind, and given the fact that this committee is meeting every 2 weeks, our meeting 2 weeks from today will be prior to the next available strategy session that we can present recommendations as a committee to the full council. So our not taking any votes on this today will allow the committee more time to ask questions, get answers, and consider all of what we're presented today, but will not delay us taking it to the full council on whatever that first strategy session day is. I believe it might be September 8th. So, and would like to welcome Mayor Vi Lyles, who has just joined us as well. So,
Good morning. I think it's still morning, right?
it is still morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
So anyway, just wanted to put that out there. We will be taking any recommendations that come out of any of our August work to the council at that September strategy session. So with that, I would ask Mr. Rios to get us up to speed on last week's community input group meeting.
More members and people who have joined us. To go work. So first, I was informed to share.
All right, Mr. Rios, we're going to have somebody check on your dial-up internet.
I'm in my office.
Not yet.
Okay, so somebody needs to go over. First, you'll see the documentation currently that are broken up along the group in 4 workout groups.
Hey, Mr. Rios?
Groups have been
We are still having a lot of trouble hearing on our end. Is Ms. Williams with us and able to give the report, or is there any way to get you on a stronger connection? All of a sudden, we are only hearing about every third word.
If we can move forward with Chief Jennings' presentation, I can find my way over the stage.
All right, perfect. We'll do that then. We'll jump ahead to item 3 on the agenda. We'll get Mr. Rios in a situation where we can hear all that he has to tell us. And so, Chief Jennings, if you're ready, we will jump to your part ahead of Mr. Rios' part.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Chief Jennings is here with us, and he's going to cover the 8 Can't Wait. My name is Deputy Chief Stella Patterson, and I'm over our Administrative Services Group, which includes our Police Training Academy and also our recruitment session. And so I'll be delivering our presentation this morning. Also with me is Major Bradley. She is the major over training and professional standards. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, yes, sir. All right, so we do have a presentation for you. Somebody can put that on the screen. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So we'll start with recruitment and hiring. CMPD is committed to hiring qualified applicants. And certainly here at CMPD, we embrace the mindset of delivering exceptional service and also a guardianship mindset. We understand that police it is by consent of the people. From day one at the academy, we teach our recruits to value people, to value one another, to obey the Constitution and the laws of our land. That is our core vision. That is what we do. And being a police officer, of course, I think everybody knows in today's time is very challenging, and of course is very needful for us. Today, we want to share with you, starting with our current staffing and projections, along with our vacancy numbers. I want to talk about our termination, resignations, and retirements that has been very impactful in the last couple of years for us. In addition to, we'll talk about our recruitment efforts, our application process, and also to the current climate around policing and the impacts that we are feeling And we want to leave you with what is working well, as well as our challenges and our next steps and needs. All right, next slide. Next slide. Next slide. With respect to, we talked about our staffing. Thank you, that's it right there. So I wanted to show you a visual of where we are currently as an organization. We look at our allocations and our population increase over the past couple of years. So this was provided by the worldpopulation.com. And if you look at it, we'll start with that dark green line, which represents our current allocations and our current staffing numbers of police officers as we stand today and the projection into the future if we were to remain with the number of allocations that we have. You see around 2017, 2018, there was a slight bump up in the number of officers that student council approved, including the 100 officers that Chief Putney asked for at that time. If you look at the yellow line, go back, the yellow line represents what a population was continue to grow, what projections would be if we had 2.24 officers per 1,000 residents. The national goal of the national average is to have 2.26 officers per 100 residents. So if you just look at this from a visual perspective, you can see right now there is a huge gap. We're way under in the number of officers we should have. And also, too, you can see what it would take even in the future to that number, to that ideal number. As time goes on, if we don't fill vacancies or we don't acquire more officers, we're going to see where that gap just continues to widen. Next slide, please. Currently, we are sitting at 172 officer vacancies. This graph here depicts, shows you by our divisions what our numbers and what our staffing looks like. The light green represents, of course, our ideal staffing, where we should be, where our allocations are in patrol. And then the darker green line shows where we are as an organization. When you look at this, you see that the impact is great for the patrol divisions. Of course, the services that we provide, being able to investigate crime adequately, and doing proactive work. Right now, we're in a posture where we're really just answering calls for service just because of the shortages that we have. When you look at this graph, you'll see that our biggest impacts are in our larger divisions: North Division, South Division, University City, Steel Creek's. Geographically, those are our largest divisions, and they need the most officers, of course, to be able to meet the demand and to make timely, to respond to calls in a timely manner. Next slide. So while 172 vacancies would be great for us right now, that's the allocation that we have. When we do a deeper dive, we recognize to really meet the needs of our workload, we really need more officers. In fact, we need about 310 officers on top of the 172 to really meet the workload goals that we have here. So this graph shows you, or this chart shows you each division, what the recommendation is based on the workload assessment that we did back in 2016. And also to what our current allocations are for staffing. And you can see that gap or that impact there. Next slide. Next slide. So really, when you start to dive and you say, well, why are we seeing these kinds of numbers? Why is CMPD such a deficit right now? It's not just us, but it's really nationally. For the last 5 years, we've really seen a steady attrition of police officers, both at CMPD and nationally. This, of course, is largely due to the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act in 1994, under then Bill Clinton, where he authorized or he approved to have 100,000 more officers added nationwide. So in doing that, of course, we added more officers, and now we are starting to see that those officers are retiring. That's where a lot of our attrition numbers come from. So if you take a look here, you see from 2015 to year to date, we can see the number of terminations along with resignations and retirements that we have had over the past 5 years. A total of 747 individuals have been separated for CMPD for those reasons. I'd like to note that in 2019, we had 9 officers who were cited for termination. 5 of them resigned in lieu of termination, and 4 of them are still waiting civil service to actually terminate them. Year to date for 2020, we just have 1. Next slide, please. Next slide. So when we look at these numbers, our recruitment and hiring staff, we're always evaluating, trying to determine, what's the best means for us to try to at least fill the 172 vacancies that we have before we even ask for even more officers, knowing that in the future, as our population grows, we're going to need to have more officers to meet the needs. So the main two functions that we are committed to in the recruitment division is, one, to recruit prospective applicants and candidates. CMPD is always looking for the best candidates to fill our ranks. Also, two, we are responsible for the processing of applications. That's what we do in our recruitment and training division. Next slide. Next slide, please. So recruiting our prospective applicants, we go to different places to do this. Our biggest bang for our buck. Next slide, please. Okay, sure. So I'm sorry, just go back one. We have a little bit of delay. My apologies. Just go back one to the recruiting prospective applicants and candidates. So the places that we are looking, and we have been looking traditionally for our applicants, really have centered around community engagement. Our ongoing pipeline of work really has been with our youth programs, our Envision, our interns, our cadets. We see that those individuals now, as they are graduating from high school and college, are seeking employment as a police officer. We also have made investments with our high school explorers. Of course, we want to start as early as we can with our young people, and also to our ASAP program, which I believe you had a presentation on 2 weeks ago. Also to colleges and HBCUs. Those are key for us. We want an educated workforce, of course. And so we really have focused in the last couple of years on our HBCUs so that we can obtain our diversity. That Major Browley's here with me. She can talk a lot about that, but we're going to wait till we get a little bit further in the presentation. Military bases is also a place that we have been looking historically for applicants. What many people do not realize or do not know is that the military is pretty diverse. 20 to 25% of our military force is females. That is a good place for us to find quality female applicants. Also to, of course, job fairs. We go to as many as we can locally, our Pride Parade, anything that is happening in town, we try to be a part of that. We try to get our voices out. We actively recruit in those places. A big win for us lately has been our job apps. That's our application system and tracking system, way long overdue. 6 years ago, when I was a captain of recruitment, we really needed this applicant system so that we could really track all our applicants to know when they enter and when they exit the process, why they haven't responded to us. With job apps, we are now able to allow applicants to apply on a daily basis, which we did not have that previously, and also to track them throughout the hiring process. It's really important for us to know where each applicant is, and if they happen to fall out of our process, where they fall out at so that we can follow up with them. One other thing we had is our marketing campaign, which we're going to talk about more in just a second. This has been a huge win for us because we understand in COVID, at this time, we cannot effectively go out and recruit. We have to really rely on our marketing and our advertisement campaign. Next slide. Some of the key incentives that we offer, and we really advertise this to our prospective applicants, is that CMPD has a lot to offer, more so than other agencies. One, we have a fast-track lateral academy. So if we get police applicants who want to come to CMPD from other police agencies, in 4 weeks, we put them through our initial academy, and then they can go boots on the ground. They can be working in the streets, which is a big win for us. Also, too, CMPD offers a very competitive vacation package. We also give an incentive for our police training officer status, education. We have 401k retirement, of course, and we also give an incentive for a second language. Something that we have worked on the past couple of years, and thanks to the city manager, thank you, Mr. Manager, for that, was being able to offer a $2,500 in-city residency incentive for anybody that resides in the city of Charlotte. This has been huge for our new applicants and our new police officers coming to CMPD. Next slide. We just want to represent here some of the ways that we recruit our top talent. We're looking, like I said, we do in-person recruitment. This is the Pride Parade here at near Wells Fargo on MLK. Also, too, another platform that we use is our Facebook Live. We periodically will do sessions where applicants can call in or prospective candidates just to talk about what CMPD is about. Also, we do our press releases that allows people to know what the latest is with CMPD. Next slide. So again, in this age of COVID, going out, doing recruitment efforts are getting more difficult to do. So CMPD, we invested in our marketing campaign. We partnered with Kelso Communication, and they were inspired to do this work by the City of Charlotte's Leading on Opportunity work. Once they reviewed that final report and saw the great things that Charlotte has to offer, the strategies that we are engaging in, where we're amplifying, influencing, and trying to inspire informative change here in Charlotte, they use that as the platform to put together our recruiting campaign. And they're very intentional on the strategy of focusing on Charlotte being a city of opportunity. And so the tagline here is to accelerate your career in a community of opportunity. Next slide. The focus of Kelso's work in our advertisement campaign is really to talk about what a great place it is to live here in Charlotte, to work and to live, and for your family, not just for you as a police officer, but if you have a spouse, if you have children, we want them to be a part of this community and come here and live as well. With Kelso, and this slide here just shows you some of the things that they've done, but one of the things that they identified with us is really a need to have search engine optimization and other platforms in which to really communicate regularly and effectively with prospective candidates. And they began to really target a wide range or a wide market of people. We're being laser focused, though, on our lateral transfers because we know if we can get lateral officers in, we can put them on the streets quicker so they can provide for the needs of the community. But our target has been wide span. Next slide. We launched this advertisement campaign in February of 2020. The slide here just shows some of the images that we have on it. Again, we're talking about accelerating your career in a community of opportunity. Next slide. In addition to just the images that we have and talking about accelerating your career, we also with Kelso, they designed a e-newsletter that highlights what's happening at CMPD, all the latest news, all the latest information, anything that we think our applicants might want to know about our organization is included in that newsletter that they produce. Also, we have an interest letter. Perhaps maybe you're not quite old enough yet to be a police officer, but you want to know more about our agency and what we're doing. We have an interest letter that goes, an e-interest letter that goes directly to our recruitment section, and the sergeant in that division follows up with those inquiries. Next slide. So how does CMPD recruit our top talent? With our advertisement campaign, we know we had to be very intentional. If we want our police department to be diverse, we had to show that. And so in these ads, we feature our women, we feature our diverse community, our Asian population, our Latino officers, because we want to attract those kinds of individuals. When we look at our numbers overall at CMPD, 72% roughly of our officers are white. 17% are black, 5.7% are Latino, about 2.4% are Asian. So we know we have some work in that area to level that out a little bit so that our police department can be reflective of our community. Our ads is one way to do that. And in our advertisement campaign, as stated, we target a wide audience of individuals, and we go to the places where they're at. So at gyms, in gaming advertisement, custom searches, we're just really trying to be in those places that we know that those potential applicants could be. Some of our geographic markets that we're looking at, of course, here in Charlotte, we want to recruit people who know this community, who live here, who are from here, who are from South Carolina, that are very close to Charlotte. But also, too, we're looking in the Southeast and also in the North, Georgia, Pennsylvania, New York, Washington, D.C., Virginia, Florida, Massachusetts, just some examples of the places that we have touched. And some would wonder, well, why up north? Why are you looking up north? Well, we know that there are many people that live in the northern part of this country who really want to be police officers, but there's not a market necessarily in those areas. When you go through the application process up north, it may take 2.5, 3 years to get on as a police officer. We can get you on quicker here in Charlotte. So we want to attract some of that talent and some of those individuals to our city. All right, next slide, please. So, of course, we've run into a little bit of hurdle, even with our advertisement campaign, in the sense of COVID-19 and the civil unrest. With that, we started to see where, particularly with the civil unrest, we had less interest in becoming a police officer. Recognizing that, we began to shift our advertisement from career acceleration to really strengthen relationships, making this a community of opportunity, building the relationships with CMPD, stressing the strength of the community and being a part of the community. Next slide. Next slide, please. Just to give you some of the success of our campaign, of course, we've done extensive reporting with it. We have reached and touched a lot of places with our recruiting efforts. With our advertisement campaign, we've had more than close to 6,800 applicants who have gone directly to our City of Charlotte website to apply or to look at applying for a job with CMPD. 5,800 of those clicks or those inquiries were for police trainee positions. 883 were for lateral transfers, and more than 78,000 visitors to our charlottepolicejobs.org since we started in February. Next slide. Some more successes we're seeing is that we've had a 30% increase in our police trainee applications, 144% in our lateral entry applications. We've had 91 new hires and 95 new hires year to date in 2019, which was good. All kind of a result of that effort that we did with our campaigning. Next slide. And this is just so that you can see some comparison cities with their applications, because applications really, we're starting to see kind of here in the last month or so, a little bit of a dip in the applications. And certainly we know that that's a residual effect of the civil unrest that we have been experiencing as a nation. This is just some comparisons. Next slide. All right, so I talked to you a lot about our historical, where we've been, our numbers, our vacancy numbers, talk to you about our recruitment campaign. Now I want to talk to you about the application process, because many people always wonder, well, why can't you just get your officers through quickly? Why can't you get your recruits? But there is a rigorous application process that we have to undergo. Part of it is because the state mandates some of these processes, but also too because we want to make sure that we are getting the best applicants and the best police officers. So I'm going to turn over to Major Briley that's going to walk you through the application process.
Good morning, Major Jackie Briley here, Major over professional standards in the training academy, which recruitment falls up under that. So just looking at the CMPD roadmap to our application process, with the implementation of job apps, we have been able to streamline the first part of our application process. So now an applicant who's interested can go online and fill out an application any time of the day or night, any time of the year, any time of the month. What that does is that allows that person to fill out a City of Charlotte application. Once that application is filled out, they are sent a supplemental questionnaire. It's about 6 questions that are asked about driving, work history, drug use, and some other items that we have to vet. Initially, that person passes those 2 steps. Then they are invited to come in and do our physical testing and our written tests. We test twice a month. And one of the things that we've implemented recently to increase the female participation of passing those tests is we offer a practice test the first Thursday of each month. For 2 hours, we allow anybody to come in and practice certain portions of our test where historically our female applicants struggle on that portion of the test. And we've had some good results with that. Once that testing is passed, an application is sent, which is called an F3, and those are those state forms that Deputy Chief Patterson referred to, where we're guided by the state. That is an extensive application packet. It's approximately 20 pages long, and this is just the very beginning of what it takes to become a police officer. Once a person passes that step, then they do our first initial psychological test. This is key for us because it's a 257 question test where it allows the background investigators to get a first glimpse at what kind of person is trying to become a police officer. And we do disqualify people from this process, this portion of our process, based on the questions that are asked around various topics and specifically biases against race, gender, sexual orientation, anything like that that raises red flags. We do lose people in that portion of the process because, again, our process is very rigorous. If a person passes that initial psychological test, We do invite them in for an interview. Because of COVID, we've been doing virtual interviews, and sometimes we do in-person interviews with social distancing and mask on. If you pass that portion, then we're going to schedule you for your polygraph, and we're going to schedule you for a ride-along. And in that polygraph, it is approximately a 2-hour process where a polygraph examiner is going to ask all kind of questions related to that person. Again, being very in-depth and very in detail about the person that wants to become a police officer. Once they pass the polygraph stage, then they take their second psychological portion of our testing, which is a CPI. That's another 260 questions. Once they pass that section, then they'll take another 5 sessions of a psychological test before they do an actual sit down with a doctor. And these people are public safety board certified doctors, and then they give us feedback and whether or not that person is suitable to move on or that person is not suitable to move on. And again, if we find red flags or the doctor presents red flags to us and that person is not suitable, then we no longer move forward with that person in our process. Once all of that is done, and in the meantime, there's a background investigator doing a background investigation on this person. So they're calling references, they're calling their jobs, they're calling neighbors. They're not just calling the people that were listed on their application as a character reference, but they're calling anybody and everybody that may know this person because we're trying to delve into this person individually. And that process overall can take about 6 to 8 weeks on the short end. Once they pass that portion, then they do a chain of command review. And in that chain of command, there is a captain, a lieutenant, a sergeant, and a member of our human resources department. And that board asks that person designated questions in reference to being a police officer that are tied around multiple different facets that are important to us with integrity, with racial diversity, with strength, with physical fitness, with mental fitness. If they pass that portion, then we send them for a medical. They do a second physical fitness test. And at the very end, we submit a completed file to our civil service board. And ultimately, our civil service board has the final say so on if we're going to hire that applicant or not. So if they don't like what they see, then we don't move forward. After all the work we've done, we will not move forward with that applicant if they decide that what they've read in an approximately 15-page document about that applicant. And that's pretty much a roadmap to our application process. And again, that can take anywhere from about 6 to 8 weeks up to probably on a higher end with people who have had a lot of jobs, military, moved around a lot because we check everywhere somebody has stepped foot. That can take sometimes up to 3 to 4 months.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Briley. All right.
Okay.
Deputy Chief, are you guys ready for questions yet, or do you have something else that you wanted to present?
Just have a little bit more, sir, to present, and then we'll be ready for that. A few more things. Just want to highlight some of the metrics that we think are of importance for everybody to know concerning our applicants. Because again, we keep talking about the 172 vacancies and why can't we get them filled? Well, about only 4% of our applicants that apply really make it through our rigorous background checks. And again, a lot has to do with what the state mandates that we can and cannot allow. Some of the disqualifiers that we see is physical fitness. It's a low-level physical fitness for some of our applicants, as well as issues of disclosure or omitting information, and also to criminal history. Next slide. And skip over this to the next slide. Next slide, please. So since March of this year, we've had about 107 of our applicants withdraw from our process for various reasons. Most of it's attributed to just the climate that we're in right now. But we're hopeful that we can turn that around, that we can start to hire more applicants. Next slide. Next slide. And next slide, please. Just want to leave with what is working well, what our challenges are in the next step. Slide, please. So what is working well for us, of course, is the fact that we have a great reputation across this nation as being one of the premier police agencies. We know that Charlotte is an extremely great place to work and to live and to play, so we keep highlighting that. our community policing and our efforts that we have had around community policing historically really bodes well for us. Job apps, like I told you about, this is great. Now applicants can apply all the time. Also, too, just the increased communication, the visibility that we're doing with our advertisement campaign is working for us. Next slide. Our challenges, of course, continue to be the fact that our city is outpacing our department size. We need to have more officers to be able to do the work, to respond for calls, not necessarily for enforcement action, but just to handle the calls and to be proactive in investigating and also to providing quality service really for our residents in Charlotte and the Mecklenburg County area. Next slide. Next steps and our needs, and I will close with this, is that we have to continue this education campaign, talking about our standards and our expectations. When only 4% of those who apply make it to the academy, that's an issue for us. We'd like to see a higher number, but we believe that we really have to continue to educate. Also, too, we are looking at an intermediate entry program. So we have our lateral program, but now we want to really focus on those individuals who may already be BLET certified, basic law enforcement certified, that we can hire on to our police department. We want to continue also to partner with our HBCUs to really educate and to recruit from those areas and continue our hiring initiatives with bonuses. If we can offer a one-time hiring bonus or maybe even a moving bonus, we think we might be able to get even more applicants to us. And as a department, one of the Chief Jennings' core 4 is wellness. We want to provide more wellness to our employees because not only do we want to get them in the door, we want to keep them in the door. And we feel that our wellness plan will be able to do that. Next slide. So our needs, of course, is just our ongoing investment in our advertising efforts. Also, too, we need each of you to help us to join CMPD and to be the difference, and to provide support to the organization so that we can get strong candidates and continue to get strong candidates. All right. Thank you. I will now take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. I've got a couple, and then I know we've got Ms. Ajmera next and some others that have questions as well. In no particular order, I also did want to acknowledge that Mayor Pro Tem Julie Eisel has joined us on the WebEx as well. A couple of these, I would imagine you might not have specific answers for right off the top of your head, and that's fine. We can get the information back later, but just want to put them out there. For Deputy Chief Patterson, and this is a general question that I think a lot of people are asking as we talk about reimagining policing. As you talked about the vacancies that we have and the needs that we have in terms of more officers, I think the question that comes to mind for a lot of people, myself included, is what would that number look like in your mind? And again, not specific, but generally speaking, if we said we have come up with other ways to deal with responding to simple fender bender accidents or dealing with moving violations like running a stop sign or speeding, if we had other strategies that didn't involve CMPD having to address those sorts of issues, nonviolent and minor issues like that, generally speaking, would you feel like that would probably lessen the need for those types of officers that you say we are in need of now, if we found other ways to deal with some of those simple things that y'all are asked to do, but maybe you shouldn't be asked to do?
I think you're really hitting on something with that, Councilman. If we're able to divest or divert some of those responsibilities elsewhere, I think then that the 172 that we're sitting on, I think if we can fill those vacancies, that would at least get us halfway there. I think that would be very substantial for us. I mean, when we look at our calls for service, right now, year to date, we're at 534,000 911s that come into CMPD. We respond to the majority of those. So if there is a way to civilianize or get other units to be able to handle some of the accidents and the more minor things, yes, that would really help us in a great way. So I think, though, at a minimum, we have to have at least 172 filling those allocations.
And I anticipated that would be your feeling. I just wanted to put it on the table because I do think that that's kind of at the core of a lot of the questions that many people, both on council and the community, are asking. And using a different phrase than I'm using, when I say reimagining the police, other people are using different terminology, but I think the intent is the same, which is, do we really need all that we say we need, or are there other ways to do some of this so that our officers can focus on what their true core purpose is, which is, I think, more to addressing the violent crime and things like that. So I hope that we kind of keep all of that in mind as we go along. Another question I had was, you said, I think it was 9 officers that were recommended for termination in calendar year 2019, and that more than half of those had opted to resign or retire instead of being terminated. My question is sort of a question that goes in both directions. When someone is recommended for termination with CMPD and opts to resign or retire, if they move to Jacksonville, Florida, and want to be a police officer in Jacksonville, or vice versa, if they resign or retire in Jacksonville instead of being terminated and move to Charlotte and want to be an officer, is the new department they are applying with able to see what took place there, or by resigning and retiring, are they essentially able to hide the issue that they had at their prior department?
So that goes to each department individually. So I think where you're going with this is there a national database where you would know what employee behavior or issues they have? No, we don't have that. But each state and each department would do a thorough background check to ensure that that information would be captured. So for here at CMPD, if somebody is terminated from their agency, we would call that agency and we would find out if there's anything in their internal affairs file, or are they being cited for anything, or they have any behavioral issues. That would be part of our background check. I can't say that Jacksonville or Atlanta or another agency would be that thorough in their background, but I know for a fact we do it here at CMPD.
So you feel fairly confident that we are not hiring lateral transfers who had an issue somewhere else and managed to either through, likely through some sort of administrative maneuver, sweep it under the rug where you don't see it?
And sir, this is Major Briley. I can definitely answer to that. So when we focus on our laterals, the first thing that they have to do before we even interview them is they have to sign a waiver. And what that waiver does is that gives us permission to contact any and everybody, including their previous employer. One of the things they have to provide that we get directly is their internal affairs record. So that comes with them. So just as many people that don't make it as a regular police trainee, those are same officers for laterals that don't make it as a lateral transfer to our department, because if they're running from something or they're trying to come to us before being fired, we catch that in the very beginning, because we call those departments and we fax that waiver over to them, and that waiver says now they can tell us any and everything that happened with that officer prior to them coming to our department.
Thank you. Couple other quick ones on, I am glad we're doing an in-city resident bonus for our officers, because I do think that you cannot effectively protect and serve people that you don't know. And by living in our communities, our officers better know the people that they're there to serve. My question is maybe more for the manager, which is, has there ever been consideration of increasing that residency bonus if officers live in some of our focus areas geographically? So for instance, the 4 places that we've identified that encompass 2 square miles of our city, which is just 1%, and yet in those 4 areas we have 8% of our violent crime. Would there be a way through either census tracts or opportunity zone designations or our own data around violent crime to say that if an officer will live in those areas, that there would be additional beyond that $2,500 incentive?
Yes, so thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd go a step further. As we start to think about the corridors of opportunity and the different incentives that we have there, whether it's home ownership or bonus or incentives of that way, I believe that that is something that we can work on as a group. But again, there are so many additional things that we could do in those areas. But what I do want to do, Mr. Chair, if you'll just give me just a little bit of grace, you and the Vice Chair, a lot of where I think Chief Patterson is today is because of the council actions. So let's go back to 2016 when we had this gap in officers, and council was able to provide additional officers. So that got us, I think the last time that we had an influx was FY 2018, we're now in FY 21. But along those lines, you were able to do things with pay incentives, laterals, even how we would advertise and we would recruit. So what I heard today, which has been something we've been hearing for a while, is we've been able to turn the tide as it comes to having more officers leaving than coming. I believe in the first quarter of this year, both recruitment and retention were up 25%. So just a lot of good work from the council to get us to a point where we've stabilized a bit. Now there's a new issue on the table about reimagining police, but I just want you to know that a lot of your hard work went into being in a place today where it's attractive to come to Charlotte.
Thank you. And then last two, just real quick on the training map that you laid out there. I know that certainly at the academy, anyone who's going through the academy would be put into stressful situations and kind of test how they're able to handle that stress or that crisis. Through all the psychological evaluations that are done prior to somebody arriving at the academy, is that part of that evaluation before the academy in terms of trying to put someone in a stressful situation and see how they react?
Well, much of that training is, and we have a presentation on that. That's much of the scenario-based training, which they get several hundred hours of the scenario-based training, which puts them in those stressful situations, those hands-on trainings with role players, with pretty much live action, as close as we can get to the real thing. So that happens in our training portion once we get them into the academy as a police recruit.
So we don't provide it for them beforehand because they're not trained, of course, in how to handle those tactics. And so it would be unfair to NAPCN, I think, to put it in. But to your point, we do want to see how they respond to stress. So that's certainly something that we can look into.
And then last question is just as we're doing all these comprehensive background checks, and I am glad that, 4% is a pretty low percentage of people to get through even just all of these initial steps. But I do think that we need to have a rigorous process because you want to see those red flags before we bring someone into the department, not after. As part of that, is there a pretty comprehensive check of their online presence? Because certainly if I was being interviewed and I had something that I wanted to keep in terms of a bias that I might hold, most people would be smart enough to not answer a question in a way that would give that bias away. But oftentimes people are a little bit, might lower their guard a bit in their online presence and post things that might give you a little better sense of some of those biases or beliefs that they might hold that you might find to be red flags. How comprehensive of an online look are we doing at each of these candidates?
This is live. So we do check their social media. That's done during the interview process, and that allows us to do it impromptu. We have a laptop in the room, and we have them pull up their social media that we find. We do have other systems in place that is allowing us to search for them, LexisNexis and some other things. So we do pull up, and if we see something that is of concern, then we address it right there. We ask questions, and again, sometimes they don't leave out of that interview with a conditional job offer because of something we may have seen on their social media that is concerning to us.
Thank you. Ms. Ajmera? Ms. Ajmera, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions. So, to piggyback on Mr. Chairman's question around violent versus other calls that we are getting, is there a breakdown of calls? So I know you had mentioned 500,000 plus calls. How many are violence related and how many are sort of minor issues? Can we get that breakdown?
So I don't have that with me, but certainly we will get that information, get that back to you.
That would be great. And in our follow-up report, if you all could also provide recommendations as to who could possibly address minor issues or calls that we are getting, and some recommendations around that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Earlier, you had mentioned that you reach out to previous employers for background checks. Are there any challenges in terms of obtaining reports from other departments across the nation?
No, ma'am. When they sign that waiver, if for some reason we're unable to get any information, then we put that back on the applicant and we say, hey, we are trying to get your employment record from this agency. We haven't had any luck with speaking to this person. Could you get that for us? Until you get that for us, you don't move forward in our process. And usually that's when the person makes a phone call and says, hey, I'm trying to apply for a job in Charlotte. I need you to provide my information. But no, we don't move forward until we speak to someone who either supervises that person directly or that person's boss's boss. There's just no way we'll move forward with someone without speaking to their previous employer.
Got it. Thank you. So are these reports that are coming, are these coming from their HR division? So for an example, if there is an internal review or a report that's been filed by a peer, those reports will be with HR division. So the reports that you are getting, are they directly coming from HR?
So sometimes it's both, right? Some agencies, their HR handles all their personnel files and even their internal affairs files, but most police agencies have an internal affairs division or unit that handles employee misconduct. And so we could just go direct with them, or we could just call them directly to get that information.
Okay. Thank you. In one of the slides, I see a breakdown between termination and resignation, and we certainly have high number of resignations. Do they fill out exit survey? And if they do fill out resignation survey or exit survey, what have you found in terms of keeping or retaining as officer? What are some of the challenges that they have mentioned in their exit survey?
So our HR division does exit interviews of every employee who resigns or leaves the organization. And what we have learned and what we have seen from those surveys is we lose the majority of our people between that 1 and 5 year mark, and also to that 6 to 10, but the majority is the 1 to 5 years. And the feedback that we have gotten and received mostly is just not a good career fit for them, or they're transitioning to a civilian sector position or job that they want, or a move with the family. So maybe being a police officer, the third shift hours just doesn't work for their family life. And so they seek employment elsewhere as a result of that.
Thank you. So I don't see necessarily any feedback directly with the compensation or benefits.
No, I don't think so. I mean, isn't usually what we're hearing. I think, and we're thankful to the city manager, as he pointed out, and to council for the pay increases that Chief Putney worked on so hard for the last couple of years that we have seen. We're not hearing that is the issue necessarily. I think it's more just around that policing just is not a good fit for them. Chief,
I understand. No, thanks to Marcus's leadership and council for approving or having approved competitive pay for our police officers, especially the ones that we are trying to recruit. Other questions I have, if you go back to slide number 4, where you have the breakdown of officers per population. So is there a city charter or legislature requirement for a certain amount of officers per population?
I'm sorry, are you asking, is there a legislation that requires we have so many officers per population?
Yes, per population, yes.
Not to my knowledge. My understanding really is just looking ideally, just as a national model, what that number looks like. how many officers you should have per population.
Okay, and what is that number? I didn't catch that. Was it
2.26 officers per 1,000 residents.
Got it. Thank you. So on slide 13, could you go back to slide number 13, where you have percentage of sworn officers who live in Charlotte area? Do we know how many, and have we seen any increase since we had rolled out this program for incentives for officers to live in the city? Has there been any increase in that percentage?
So percentage-wise, right now, we have about 30% of our officers that reside within the city of Charlotte, about 42% within the county, which is almost half. We have not done an evaluation or analysis yet to see if the numbers have risen since we have implemented the residency incentive. But we will take a look at that and follow up with you.
Yes, that would be great, just so that we get an idea of whether the investments we are making are they producing the results that we want to see. You also had mentioned that up in North, it takes longer for officers to, I guess, get hired. I don't remember the time frame that you had mentioned. How is their process different than ours, and why? I guess, what is it that takes longer than what we do here?
Ideally, let me say this. So it's about 2 years in New York and Massachusetts and some of the Pennsylvania northern states, partly due to they don't have as many vacancies as us, and then also to their civil service process. They have to be civil service approved, and their process is a little bit more extensive than ours. Now, their hiring process, I don't know exactly, because every state, every city has different requirements of what they, what is required for a police officer. So that may just vary just by state by state. But for us, we know that it takes about 6 months, 4 to 6 months to get our applicants through our process.
So in North, you said there aren't a lot of vacancies. Is it, do they provide retirement benefits for, retirement healthcare benefits for retirees?
Up north, I'm not sure. We'd have to research that question.
Okay. So you said also there is a step in their process where it requires civil service approval?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not familiar what that looks like. So could you tell us more about what that step in the process and what does that mean in term, and are we missing anything from our process?
So I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So what we do is once the applicant is completely finished with our entire background investigation, we complete a state form, which is called an F8 form. And the only thing we take off of that is the person's race and gender. Everything else, we put their complete background information on there, minus any medical stuff in that. And we actually send copies of those to the entire Civil Service Board. They review those application packets, the F8 packet, and if they have questions about anybody in our civil service meeting, what they do is they pull that person and then we have a conversation about that person. And any question that they have on that person, whether it's debt, whether it's job history, whether it's a work reference, it doesn't matter. We answer those questions.
Thank you. And on slide number 26, I see the process is certainly very laborious here. How long has this system been in place?
This system is, I've been in recruitment as an officer, as a lieutenant, and now over as a major. And this system has been in place at least when I came on, minus the 3 psychological portions. Those were implemented within, you say, the last 2012. But the rigorous background investigation portion has been in place as long as I can remember, and that's at least 22 years when I was hired here.
Okay, so this system and all the steps have been in place for 15 years, you said?
2012 was when the psychological portions were put in place.
Got it. So that's new. So that's about 8 years.
Yes.
That's about right.
That's correct. And so I've been on the police department for 24 years, and I remember when I got hired, many of the same steps were in place. Some might have been shortened or different or modified, but the essential things, you had to do the online test, you had to do the physical fitness testing, you had to do the application, polygraph, interview, test, all those things in play, and just modified them over the years.
So what I hear, the last change was made in 2012 around psychological review. Is that correct?
Yes. And one thing we did add was the physical fitness test towards the end. Right before you enter the academy, we want to ensure that our applicants are fit because the state does require that they pass a test at the end of the academy. So we don't want an individual being disadvantaged by going to the academy when they're not physically fit. So they do have to go through that. That's a step that we added.
Fair enough. Yeah. Thank you so much. This was pretty informative. Appreciate it. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Ajmera. We've got a couple other people queued up for questions. Ms. Watlington will be next. I will point out to everybody, we've got 4 substantial pieces of our agenda today that I know all of you want to make sure we get to, and we are an hour in now. So both to our presenters and to all of us, I will just remind us, if we're going to get to all of it or most of it today, let the presenters know if you've got a question that they can get you the information later if it doesn't need to be answered immediately. And so we've got Mr. Rios queued up and ready to go whenever we're done with this section now. So Ms. Watlington, take it away.
Hey, several of my questions have already been addressed, so I'll just try to hit what's remaining. The first one is in regards to the 2.26 ratio. I'm really interested to know, I understand that this ratio exists, somebody optimized it, but as it relates to actual output metrics, I want to understand how we're performing versus things like response time versus things like successfully closed out cases. You don't have to answer that right now if you don't have it, but that's really what I want to assess our need against, is our actual performance metrics.
Yes, ma'am. We'll get that information for you. We don't have it broken out, but we'll get it.
Okay. The next piece is, and it piggybacks a little bit off of what Mr. Chair's question was, I would like to see the breakdown of the activity. So when you were doing kind of the effort balance chart and understanding how much work is actually required so that you could get to your numbers of vacancies, I think it would be helpful to just see it doesn't have to be necessarily a time chart, how much time officers are spending doing particular things, but what types of things are they doing? I think that'll be easier for us to understand what, like to your point, could be divested.
Sure. And we do have that data available. We'll just have to get it and pull it out and break it down into categories that you're asking.
Perfect. Thank you for that. You mentioned, so you mentioned the demographics, and I know that each week or each month, each new recruit class that CSB approves gets the demographics for who's going into the recruit class. I'd like to dig in a little bit more about the 4% application success criteria. Do we see any difference between the minority applicants as far as where they're dropping out versus their counter?
Yeah, so one of the things, so I'll start with the females first and foremost. That's an area that we've really been trying to increase our recruitment efforts on, and that is the physical fitness portion. That is an entry-level test. That is a broken down, smaller version of the state test they would have to pass at the end of their 6-month academy. And that's why we implemented that practice session. It's open to everyone, so males can come to that, but it was specifically targeting to bring females to come in and practice a portion of that test that usually disqualifies them to even get them in the door to even become a police officer. So that's an area we've been trying to make some gains in. As far as the minority candidates, that was one of the things that we've started is an education piece with HBCUs. Unfortunately, sometimes where we lose some of our candidates, and it's across the board, not just minorities, but because we have less minority applicants, it's more impactful. in those numbers, and that is the omission of minor things that initially would not disqualify an applicant, but because we're not told about it, and they're asked the same questions from beginning all the way to the end, and then we find out about it, then that we consider that an integrity issue. And so we really try to focus on our juniors and our seniors at the HBCUs, and we created a list for them. And it's basically things about when to stop if they have association marijuana use, things like that. And so we try to target the juniors because we want them to apply with us as their seniors in college. And so that's something that we've been pushing to the CJ departments, trying to get that information out there, so that way we can hopefully not lose them in that portion of our process.
Gotcha. The next question I've got is, we talked a little bit about the academy and some of the training there, but from a continuous education standpoint, I'd be interested to understand how often I see in our background materials, and if this is outside of your wheelhouse, let me know. But I see in our background materials that there are a number of different types of continuing ed or professional development classes, and they come in like 8-hour increments and things like that. The information we have in here is versus 2016. I would like to see what that ongoing looks like, what that education looks like. If I'm an officer every year, every 2 years, what is the cycle for this continual education? Because one of the things that I've heard from folks is a concern that the training is administered at some point, but it's just not fresh in folks' minds. And I know that that requires more training staff and that kind of thing, and people off the streets to make sure that they can receive this training on an ongoing basis. But I think that we need to dig in there, because it would be a shame to give folks training and then they not be able to recall it when need be. The next question that I have follows along those same lines. And again, I'm not sure if it goes in this particular conversation, but I'm going to lift it up anyway. Is one piece, and we may get into it with the can't wait, the de-escalation training. And I've had an opportunity to be in the simulation and go through some of the training things in the Citizens Academy. But that's one that I would really like to dig in and understand what exactly that training consists of, because I think that's where the rubber meets the road in terms of some of these things that we see whenever there are incidents. So that one, I would like a little more in-depth understanding of what our de-escalation training actually consists of. The next one, or I'm sorry, did you have a comment on? No? Okay.
Councilwoman Wallington, if you can hear me, we do have a training presentation. I don't know, Mr. Chair, if you want us to get into that, but some of those questions are answered in our training presentation.
I didn't realize y'all were only halfway home on your presentation. So I hope everybody brought a sandwich. All right, we'll circle back to that, Ms. Watlington, if there is a training piece. I didn't know that was part 1 of 2.
Okay. And then just real quick, 2 more. As far as the folks who are not passing the fitness test, I'm familiar, like you mentioned, with the pre-test and some of that practice opportunity folks are able to get. Can you talk a little bit about what happens for people who do fail the training or maybe fall out of the academy because of physical fitness? What does that connection look like to maintain that relationship in the hopes that they can get back through it successfully?
Well, we don't have any, for physical fitness, that's an ongoing growth process throughout our academy. So if someone were to fail out of our academy and not leave on their own, it would be because of a state-related topic. So it would be a BLET topic. But for physical fitness, that's something that's ongoing growth as they go through our academy process. So we're not terminating somebody or we're asking somebody to leave strictly for that.
And that before they get to the academy, that fall out of the application process due to not passing that physical fitness. Do they stay in the system? Do they get an opportunity to come back? What does that look like?
They stay in, so they can come back within a year of taking that written test. What we do is, again, we offer them an opportunity to come out. If they can't come during our regular scheduled testing date, what we do is we have a background investigator reach out to them and say, anytime you want to come, we'll set the course up, because it's normally set up already in a designated location, and they can come and practice the test as many times as they want to before they retake it officially.
And then my last question is, as we think about being an employer of choice, do we understand, you mentioned the CJ departments, and I would imagine that there are a number of career paths that someone who is majoring in criminal justice would want to go into. Can you talk a little bit about, or you can provide this information later if that is easier. I'd like to understand how we compare against the other potential careers someone would choose to take on in terms of pay, in terms of hours, that kind of thing. How do we stack up there?
I could definitely provide that information to you separately after doing a little bit more research.
Sure. Thank you. That's it for me, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Ms. Watlington. Up next, we have the only male member of council I would put any money on being able to pass the CMPD fitness test, Mr. Newton.
Is that Councilman Driggs?
Nope.
Hey. Driggs too. Councilman Driggs too. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the Deputy Chief and the Major for your presentation. Great questions by my colleagues, by the way. So I only have a couple of questions pertaining to the application process itself. The first one is a question just for clarification. When I saw the chart, I might have missed this, but I didn't see where before a conditional job offer is made, there was a psychological evaluation or test administered. And I just wanted to ask, because it sounds like that is the case. Maybe I missed it in the chart. Is that correct? I think, Major, you had said that there are 3 of them that are administered. So at the very least, one of those before the conditional job offer?
Yes, that is the BRAINS questionnaire. That's a 257 questionnaire that we send out.
Okay, and my last question pertains to the review process on the tail end of the application process. You know, we have two boards that are comprised of citizens that have specialized expertise that oversee our department, one being the Civil Service Board, the other being the Citizens Review Board. I think hopefully there's time for us to hear more about their duties later on today. Now, having said that, it's just the Civil Service Board, as it would appear in the process or on that chart, that actually reviews potential applicants and candidates. Why is it just them and not the Citizens Review Board as well?
That's the city charter that outlines that. It's not, I don't think it's the Citizens Review Board's duty to do that. I think they would have to, their roles would have to be redefined to do that. But under the charter that the city has, the Civil Service Board is the one that does that review.
And so I'm clear that it's not something that would be prevented by, as far as you know, Deputy or Deputy Chief, it's not something that would be prevented by state statute or state policy. It's our own. And if we were to want to change that, it would be something that would need to be amended within our own charter. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And I sit on the North Carolina Training and Standards Commission, and no, it is not a state mandate or a state requirement.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Newton. And then our final question on this topic, our second to final question on this topic will be to the mayor, who I'm sure could pass the CMPD fitness test.
Of course you could.
Before we started COVID-19. Is it me?
It is you.
Okay. I have just a couple of things, and these don't have to have a response right now. One of the things that you talked about, and this relates to Ms. Watlington's question, in 1 to 5 years, people leave because it's not a good fit, but you also talked about family life. I'd like to kind of ask you to examine the systems that we have. So CMPD, I'm sure, does assignments by seniority. And often I wonder if you come out of the academy, you're immediately at the bottom of the list for assignments that would perhaps help with family life. I wonder if there are other departments that deal with it differently. And if you have other systems within the system that impact recruitment and retention, what are those that you would see? I think of it as, you know, if your family life is preventing us from keeping people, but you have to get to 20 years because so many of you have been there 20 years before you can have a shift that allows for that. It's going to be difficult. The other thing that I wanted to ask about is, do we have a trailing spouse program? Because today in our workplace, most people work. There are 2 people, the person and the spouse, or the person and the partner.
And I wonder, when we're doing our recruitment, if that is an obstacle, do we put those folks up for city jobs opportunities so that we can get both the police officer as well as the other person? So those were my two questions. Systems within the system that prevent people from staying, and a trailing spouses program or a trailing partners program. Those are my questions.
All right, thank you, Mayor. And Mr. Driggs, close us out on this one, please.
All right, just quickly, I'm a guest here, I understand. Chief, for one, thank you for demonstrating to us the care and diligence with which CMPD goes about selecting its members. I hope everybody on this call is impressed. I had one question about the idea of diverting certain responsibilities away from the sworn officers in order to, isn't there a connection between a lot of the activity that doesn't require all of the training of the sworn officer and their core mission? I mean, if they're out in the community, they're doing traffic stops, for example, or they're responding to calls. Doesn't that kind of provide a lot of input to them that assists them? So might there be problems with trying to take away some of the things they do that don't require all their training, but do get them out among the community?
Yes, sir. It's interesting that you bring this up. We're in our retreat today, our strategic retreat with our majors, and we have been talking about this very issue because so much of what we do overlaps, like our mental health, our homelessness,
Right.
Even some of our youth programs. They are all intricate and they are all related. So when you start talking about pulling them apart and who does what services, it can get quite convoluted. But still, to that end, we do believe that there are certain things that could be exclusive just to other units that they can do. Like with the traffic, I think traffic accidents is the main one that other cities have shown that model, that CMPD or the police officers necessarily don't need to take those reports, that other entities can take that. And I don't think that impacts what we do or would have a major impact at all. But it would give us the opportunity to be more proactive in our neighborhood because those resources would not be allocated to that.
Right. No, point taken. Last thing is just a brief comment. If you're going to use data like the national average or whatever that reference is, I think we really need to dig deeper. I'm sure Ms. Watlington would back me up on this. So if you have lower income communities, for example, I think there's a presumption that their need for law enforcement per capita could be different from Palm Springs. And so I hope we would get a more differentiated analysis of what the proper comparables are, adjusted for per capita income, the ethnic mix of the community, and things like that, so we can benchmark ourselves in a more differentiated way.
Yes, sir, absolutely. Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good point, Mr. Driggs.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Jones, and then I think if the deputy chief is okay with it, we're going to roll back to Mr. Rios, who was going to go first, but we've now got in a place where we can hear him.
Okay. So thank you, Mr. Chair. To Councilmember Driggs' point, we do have this 20 cities that we benchmark ourselves against. And for those 20 cities, we're right in the middle in terms of officers per 1,000 of per capita. So and we can get that information out to you, but we're in the middle of those 20 cities that we always benchmark ourselves against.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, and thank you to our friends at CMPD. And if you're able, hold on the line. We'll try to circle back to the training, but we do want to get the feedback from the community input group from Mr. Rios now that we've got him and his dial-up internet problems solved.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you for the opportunity to present. I will try to go through this as expeditiously as possible, considering our time constraints. The first document, the document that's being shared at this moment, allows you to see how we took the now 18-member group and broke it up into 4 different subgroups. Those 4 subgroups have been assigned 3 to 4 of the areas of focus that this committee has asked be reviewed. And so each one of these groups has been assigned those pieces, and I'll go in a second on how that work is being divvied up. So if we can go down to the topic calendar, you'll see that as you all know, we started our work in July looking specifically at youth programs. We did not have enough time in the meeting, and you'll hear a bit more about some of our time challenges to go into the community engagement piece, but we offered a cursive look at our youth programs in our first meeting. session 1, which just occurred at the end of July, we began the process of looking through 8 Can't Wait. We tasked the other subgroups, subgroup 2 and subgroup 4, to begin to look at Citizens Review Board and Civil Service Board. And then you'll see that in our next session, we have several items to go over, including recruitment and training, which it's great that CMPD has offered us the presentation on recruitment today, because that will help inform some of the work that will be looked on by the subgroup. You'll see that we have a number of topics to go through in December. They have not been assigned a review date as of yet. September, yes. So we're still determining how we're going to divvy out that work. We'll go down a little bit further and we'll talk through procedure. And I apologize for reading. I know all of you can, but I think it's important to ensure that I emphasize on these points. So there's 15 items to review by the end of our September 24th meeting. Each meeting will have an expert giving a presentation. We found that it is vitally important to offer an expert voice, and that may not be an expert that everyone agrees with, but it's an expert that offers some research and data related to the topic that is pertinent. Members will spend the bulk of their time in the Zoom breakout rooms. Again, this is because we have such a heavy task before us of trying to accomplish all 15 of the items. We really want to spend our time giving the breakout groups the opportunity to go through those items diligently and afford us with as much information as possible. Facilitators are tasked with recording the meetings, helping take notes, get any information or resources the subgroup may need, move along the discussion, and help determine who will be presenting the subgroup analysis. As mentioned in the intro, we have 2 individuals here today that will be offering the first subgroup analyses that we have to present to the Safe Communities Committee. We're strongly encouraging, again, because of time restraints, that the members of the subgroups meet apart from that time. So we're asking them to really spend a lot of time working offline. We're also asking any member of the larger group, if they have any information that's pertinent, to share it out with the subgroup. Each subgroup is afforded the opportunity to present their subgroup analysis. So again, we ask the members of the subgroup who it is they would like to present the information that they've gathered from their subgroup. And again, that's in response to what we heard from this committee, that there is a desire that individuals from the community represent the voice of the groups that they're in. Each designee will be given 3 minutes, and you'll see that play out today again due to time constraints, but they will be asked to stay for as long as they can to answer any questions that come from the committee or council members present. It's important to remember that the input that is offered will not automatically become policy. So we went over that with our group. They are offering us input, they're offering us information to help you all make the best possible decision that, again, will be moved forward to council. We ask that any policy work or anything that is coming from another entity be cited appropriately, and all documents are due to me prior to our Tuesday meeting, our Tuesday Safe Communities meeting. So I just wanted to ensure that we went through that procedure. I think it's vitally important that we share that out with the committee, that they're aware of the process that we're undertaking. I will now go over as quick as possible, an overview of our Community Impact Group meeting. We asked Chair Eggleston and the facilitators asked that he again review the charge with community members. There were some questions around that. He also took the time to thank our group members and again offer up thank them for offering up their feedback. We had Samuel Sinangwe present. Samuel represents Campaign Zero. He's one of the co-founders of that organization and has done the bulk of his work on the 8 Can't Wait initiative. And so I'm going to just go into some of the points related to his presentation. And again, you'll hear some of this recapped again when Robert Dawkins, who is a part of Group 2, who was tasked with 8 Can't Wait, will offer up what they presented. So the presentation was broken up into 2 categories. One, reducing power, the use of force and the accountability therein, and then shrinking the role, looking at divestment, alternatives, and decarceration, again, holistically based on research related to initiatives that have occurred in other places in the country. there was a recognition that police officers have been called upon to do work that they are not always the best equipped to do or have not specifically been trained around. That ties back to mental health crises, poverty, homelessness, and substance abuse, and the need that others in the community have begun requesting for the shifting away of resources from police departments to professionals that are trained on those particular modalities. There was a mention of, and this actually dovetails well into a piece you heard earlier, there's a mention of a New York Times report that came out recently related to 911 calls for service. Unfortunately, our information was not publicly available through our data portal and so was not included there. But nationally, data shows that the typical officer spends approximately 4% of their shift responding to issues of violent crime. Overall, only about 1% of 911 calls have to do with violent crime. The vast majority of arrests are not for violent crime either. In Charlotte in 2018, this is data that was available, only 13% of arrests were for violent crime. Again, the organization Campaign Zero began in 2015 by launching mapping police violence and collection data in regards to everyone killed in the U.S. by a police officer. They have 3 times more data than is currently collected by the federal government. Levels of police violence vary widely by city. Charlotte actually is around the national average with approximately 6 police killings per year. There is a request to do better analysis of use of force data, again, because data was not available via the data portal, and you'll hear that theme come up more than once. There are narratives in place, and I think Councilmember Driggs keyed this up. There are narratives in place that have been used to pivot away from the reform or transforming of police. And so police are using, there is data that shows that police have used force, especially in black communities, because they're encountering violent individuals in violent neighborhoods and find themselves having to defend themselves from harm. That's a narrative that gets perpetuated often. Data doesn't support that narrative. There's no direct correlation between the rate of violent crime and police killings. And what matters is how police choose to respond in particular communities, the policies therein, the practices and culture of departments dictates the likelihood an officer will use force. 99% of police killings, officers are not charged with a crime. 1 in every 300 killings, an officer is convicted of a crime. In almost all cases, the criminal justice system does not charge officers. So again, this is national data that was compiled by Campaign Zero and was shared out during this presentation. If an officer is to be held accountable, it depends on the department policies and then being disciplined or fired for violating those policies in absence of prosecution. So CMPD was, as we shift into talking about 8 Can't Wait, there was a focus on that in the presentation. CMPD was missing at the time of its initial review 5 of the 8 policies recommended in 8 Can't Wait. Although we had elements, they did not meet the standard of best practices established by groups in the field, including the President's Task Force on Policing, local and national organizers, the Police Chiefs Executive Research Forum, and even recommendations made by the Department of Justice. There was a recognition made by Samuel in regards to this being fluid and that CMPD has begun to become more proactive on changing particular policies. There was a long discussion around the ban of chokeholds and strangleholds and how nationally the majority of police departments do not ban either. We have implemented a ban, and though it is restrictive, it is not as restrictive as some other municipalities. And so there is an acknowledgement of good movement, but it could be more restrictive if we chose. There is conflicting policy language, and just give me a second to go through this. So with our duty intervene policy specifically in Section 11, it stated that officers will intervene either by directive of a supervisor or if they believe a manifest injustice would occur. There is no definition for manifest injustice. There is also some ambiguity around the definition of the word case. There's, again, you'll see mentioned egregious behavior that shocks the conscience. This term is not properly defined or not defined at all, and that creates ambiguity, which makes it even more difficult to hold accountable police officers. Other departments are asking that officers intervene whenever they see a use of excessive force in violation of department policy. They've defined the needs defined the specifics related to that policy. There is a push you'll see across those departments to exhaust all alternatives before the use of deadly force. So all alternatives must be used or are for some reason unavailable to have deadly force as an option. CMPD's policies do not currently require this. The policy of shooting vehicles, interestingly enough, does state that it must be used in those instances. It must be a last resort. So we know that we can. This is what Sam pointed out. There are instances where we have stated that things cannot be done unless they are last resort. We're not using that same language when it comes to our deadly force policies. 6% of police calls nationwide have to do with shooting into a moving vehicle where the vehicle itself was the weapon. Charlotte has doubled the national average currently for the years 2005 through 2019. So we're at approximately 12%, where again the only other weapon used was the vehicle. 14% of all shootings by CMPD involve someone in a vehicle. Allowing officers to shoot at vehicles, even when the vehicle is the only threat, this is considered not a best practice. Other departments have more restrictive policies, and Sam went through several of the policy examples from cities, including St. Louis, which has the most restrictive policy, all the way to New York, which has a policy that allows for shooting when a vehicle is used to ram other vehicles. You'll remember that became a focus area after some terrorist activity related to that action. So across the board, what you heard Samuel often say was that we needed much better comprehensive reporting. We needed better data to hold departments accountable. And in our case, we needed to make our data more readily available to the public. One of the other pieces that came up was that every time an officer uses force, including if they point a firearm at someone without discharging, that ought to be reported and investigated. And if it involves misconduct, should result in some level of accountability being had. Currently, CMPD does not consider when you point a firearm at someone a use of force. They do document some of these cases, but not all, as a tag in body cam recording. The challenge with body cam recording, there are instances where that is not available, i.e. when a plainclothes officer is executing an arrest or if something is occurring inside of someone's domicile. There was a mention of, again, this pointing a gun, and I know that we've done some work around around holster monitors, and again, making that data available. The departments that add this as being a part of use of force have seen less incidents and more accountability across the board. So that again was a quick synopsis of the presentation that was offered by our expert, the individual representing Campaign Zero. I'd like to offer up some of the comments that were made from community members in regards to the process that we've undertaken. So community members feel rushed. They feel that what they're being asked to do is a Herculean task, and that to provide really deep information to you all in such a quick process does not allow for the depth that you need to be produced in these subgroup analyses documents. There's frustrations around not having enough time to work. For instance, the presentation that was offered was so robust that we had allotted 30 minutes and we went well past an hour. And that had to do with the presentation and the question and answer period. And so people really the individuals in this group, by and large, really want to understand what it is that they're being tasked with. They want to have a depth of knowledge around the topic, and in so doing, be able to present the best possible information to this committee. There was statements around the need for all the critical information being made available to them to offer the best input, and some challenges in relation to how information gets pressed forward. Being fully transparent, there were individuals that felt at the last meeting with the monies that was given to the CMPD Explorer program that it went against what they had stated, which was that they wanted to know more deeply about those youth programs before making decisions. And so they want to ensure that what they offer you all is heard, is understood, and is used to make decisions. We are shifting a few things in relation to our meetings, and again, just went through the procedure, but I think it's important to share. We'll be going from a 90-minute meeting to a 120-minute meeting. I'm proposing that we move our meeting dates from Thursdays to Tuesdays to allow for a full week, just to give us more time to collect all of the subgroup analyses that the groups are producing. And the presenters will now speak at the second half of the meeting to allow for that first half to be around the breakout meetings. And groups will present their subgroup analyses to the larger group before it comes to the subcommittee, before it comes to this committee, in order for everyone to be able to be afforded the opportunity to chime in where appropriate. So that's my recap of the meetings, and I know I'm speaking a little while around the community input group, subgroup analyses on the topics at hand.
Thank you, Mr. Rios. So I will throw this out for the committee, and it's not something that we necessarily have the bandwidth or the time to mull over during this meeting right now, but I think that we as a committee need to think about it, and maybe I can have offline conversations with each of you about your thoughts. I'm torn because I know that we have a simultaneous, we are simultaneously dealing with a call to act quickly, and then also we're being told by our community input group, and we're seeing on our own agendas that when we try to bite off too much of this at one time, it's hard to do it effectively. And obviously there is a happy middle ground in there somewhere, and it's going to be difficult to find, undoubtedly, but I think we as a committee need to try to get close to being on the same page in terms of how do we want to balance that expediency with effectiveness. And I'm not sure we've found the right middle ground yet, but we'll keep trying. As far as changing the timing of your meetings, certainly whatever works for our staff and our input group members would defer to y'all's preference on what you think will make you most effective. So whatever you need to do on that, feel free. Ms. Watlington, I saw you had your hand raised. Did you have a question on this, or did you want to wait until after the input group speakers do their report outs?
Okay, that was my question. I wanted to know what the community members had specific to.
Can you speak up a little, Ms. Watlington? I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Yeah, sure. One of my questions can wait because really it was just I wanted to know what the community members actually said about this topic, but I did want to hit a couple other things real quickly. Number one, I agree with you. Whatever staff and the input group needs to do, I think one of the things that is key is preparation. So whether it's this meeting or whether it's the community input groups, I don't think the presentation this shouldn't be the first time we see the information coming in. I think that would enable us to do more here by having the information that we can mull over and bring our questions so that we can do the work during the meeting versus getting the information. But real quick, two things. Where can we listen to the meeting, the input groups? I know that they were being recorded or captured in some way. Can you send that to us, Federico or Donata, offline? If one of the council members wanted to listen into the meeting, if that's still an option. And then the second piece is I would like that information in regards to the cultural indicators where you talked about violent crime is not necessarily, violent crime and use of force are not necessarily related. So I'd just like to understand what those cultural indicators are that dictate the frequency of use of force in a city, and I'd like to understand where Charlotte matches up on those cultural indicators versus other areas. Do you follow what I'm saying, Federico?
I do. We have the video, and we can outfit you all with that along with the PowerPoint presentation that was provided. Okay.
But specific to the cultural question, where I think the expert talked about the use of force frequency being more correlated to the culture of the force there or the department versus violent crime in the area. I'd like to understand what those cultural indicators are and where CMPD stacks up.
That was in the PowerPoint that you referenced, Mr. Rios?
It actually was not. It was gone over very quickly by Mr. Singawe, but I can ask him for some research related to that.
So that'd be great, because whatever data we can have that may address, refute, or support this idea of if we take these policy changes that we're going to end up in the society of lawlessness, I'd like to see the data around that. I find that pretty interesting. That's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Rios, would you like to introduce the folks who will be doing the report outs from the input group?
It is my great pleasure to have the opportunity to present Robert Dawkins, who is representing Group 2. Robert is well regarded in this community as a member of the SAFE Coalition and a policy expert. Robert will be presenting on the findings of his group related to 8 Can't Wait. And Robert is a fairly opinionated individual if you don't know him already. So when asked questions related to what his group says, he will offer you that as best he can, but then also offer you his own opinion related to the topic.
In addition to any opinions you might want on American football or football.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you for having us today. I think before we start, we have to put some things in actual historical context. So the first thing that I like to say is the perception of CMPD's use of force standard here in Charlotte does not protect people in the Black community. All of the police killings are perceived to be arbitrary and have been done to Black males in particular. CMPD needs to audit the actions of its officers now to determine who is already past their limit of hand slaps and reprimands. Whether embracing the 8 Can't Wait methodology or not, comprehensive reporting needs to be kept by an independent agency that does not have the appearance of the police policing themselves. The community does not trust any police records, policies, or boards because their reports are perceived to be self-serving. This is probably part of the low response rate from the African American community to the CPMD's 8 Isn't Enough survey. With that in mind, CMPD needs to immediately remove the 8 Can't Wait checklist from its website and issue a retraction listing the points that they are not in compliance with 8 Can't Wait. Currently, CMPD is asking the public to send in suggestions on how they would like to be policed, and it's called 8 Isn't Enough. The title of the survey also needs to be changed since they are not in compliance, and the title erroneously infers that CMPD has achieved the 8 Can't Wait baseline and is attempting to move forward. In good faith, 8 Isn't Enough cannot be a tagline when the original 8 have not been achieved. On the positive note, since publishing the 8 Can't Wait checklist, CMPD has made some policy changes this month to edge closer to compliance with 8 Can't Wait. The new chokehold policy now includes strangleholds, which the absence of was a major point of contention for us in the advocacy community. We recommend that CMPD revisit its standards of operations, rules of conduct, and response to resistance policy to ensure that they are in line with the changes that have been made. The difference in the interpretation between these different governing documents, specifically in the areas of duty to intervene, use of deadly force, and shooting into motor vehicles are noted in the documents in front of you. Finally, CMPD should strive to define what is expected from its officers and not use terms like shock the conscience or manifest injustice, because vague and ambiguous terminology that lacks true definition will never be a way to hold an officer accountable. The lack of definition does not benefit the officer or the public due to the subjectivity of the standards expected from the officer. This will also be true in enforcing the 8 Can't Wait mandate. There will need to be defined language around what is expected from an officer if all other means have been exhausted in terms of using deadly force. What is the standard for firing at motor vehicles if that is the weapon, as in the example of ramming? What can be done so that officers are in a better position to understand the nature of the call first and to understand what's in their toolbox to prepare them when something comes up that's not expected? When officers run out of these tools, which sometimes happen with resistance, what does the officer do? Overall, we feel that CMPD has made some progress over the last month, but there's still work to be done before they're in compliance with your 8 Can't Wait resolution. And again, thank you for letting us give our synopsis.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rios, do we want to unpack each of those individually or get all of the report outs and then do it collectively?
I'm mindful of time, so I think we can go ahead and have both synopses. We only have one other one.
Perfect.
Tanya Jameson, who is the chair of the Citizens Review Board, will be presenting her subgroup's analysis on that topic. Tanya.
I am not seeing.
Presenting her subgroup's analysis on that topic.
Oh, there she is. Ms. Jameson, are you with us?
Sorry about that. I thought Robert was going to be on for a minute, so I went to go get my sandwich. Hold on, out of breath because I run upstairs. All right, so our group did the Citizens Review Board, and so along with being a part of the input group, I'm also the co-chair of Citizens Review Board. So I presented proposals that we have from the Citizens Review Board, as well as what said coalition also presented or as suggesting for changes for the board. Still out of breath, give me a second. All right, so you guys have basically our sort of synopsis, and this was all done through email, so we didn't actually get a chance to meet. So the biggest takeaways from our group and like what we put forth was that there wasn't universal support for subpoena power for Citizens Review Board among our group. One set does support it, another set has questions and are not comfortable with moving forward with subpoena power. And the other big takeaway as well is that there's not enough publicity around when the Citizens Review Board actually meets, and an opportunity for the public to listen in or watch or whatever. So that was the kind of the two biggest takeaways from the Citizens Review Board. There were a couple of questions about the structure of the board and how people are selected to join the board, and whether or not there needs to be training around that. But the kind of the most common theme was that, and because Citizens Review Board, we've been pushing for subpoena power. We've been working with Robert Dawkins and Safe Coalition to push for subpoena power. So the fact that there wasn't necessarily unified support around subpoena power and how that would actually work was the big takeaway for me, especially since I'm on the board and we've been talking about this over the years. So that's the basically, since you have the document, I'll be able to answer any questions that you might have.
Mr. Rios, we can either take questions of the input group or we can have CMPD address 8 Can't Wait and then take questions at the end of that.
I think we can go ahead and have them address.
All right, and there is Chief Jennings, looking very dapper. So we will welcome him on to make his presentation around 8 Can't Wait, and then we'll discuss it all collectively.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I haven't had my sandwich yet, so I'm going to be brief. And some of this has been covered as well, but I just want to be clear. One, caution on when we start hearing statistics and things that are put out. I just want to caution, we haven't vetted some of those statistics. They did not come from us. So we want to make sure that we're talking on the same level as far as some of this information is concerned. So just as others have had conversations with Sam, we have as well. And we've had multiple conversations. Our goal, and just so everyone is aware, our goal is to meet and satisfy every one of these 8 Can't Wait objectives. We're not trying to argue any points or say that we're doing something that we're not. And just Mr. Dawkins heard remove the checklist. That's been removed. We realize that it's not as simple as just checking a box and saying that we're doing that. So we have taken that off the site, and we're looking at this from a whole different perspective. And with our conversations with Sam, we've identified that there are four of these of the 8 can't wait topics that we do need to work on and that we are working on. And I'm pretty confident that we will satisfy all 8 of these at a very short time frame. And when I say satisfy them, that's not us saying that we've satisfied them. That's with the input from Sam that he agrees that we have satisfied all 8 of these objectives. One being duty to intervene, which I think we're very close to, which falls under our neglect of duty language. And with the duty to intervene, there was some questions. I think you heard Mr. Rios state that there were some questions around the terminology of case. And just to clarify what that is we have that same language in our as far as an investigative case. So if an officer has a case that they're working on, another officer intervening in that case, which is a totally separate concept. So we're going to be changing some of that language and representing that, and I think that's going to make us compliant with the duty to intervene. So as soon as we get that shored up, we're going to be in good shape there. So we just have to define what we're referring to as an investigative case as compared to an incident where someone's out in the street and they have a duty to intervene. So we're going to get there very soon. And then we did talk quite a bit about the banning the shooting of moving vehicles and some of the concept. And as we go through this with Sam is we're learning, and as well as I think he's learning as well, and I think he would admit that we have some explanations that we can go through and some scenarios. And the big thing with banning is shooting of moving vehicles is that the belief of whether a moving vehicle can be an actual use of deadly force towards an officer. And we have been able to give him examples, specifically to Charlotte, that has given him some thought as to whether or not banning a vehicle can be used as a lethal weapon towards an officer. And I think we're going to be able to get there and come to some sort of resolution on that as well. And Mr. Rios touched on the exhaust all alternatives before shooting, and I believe we're pretty close there as well. We talked as the way to get to where we want to be is the language of if no other options are reasonably available. And so we're looking at where we can make sure our policies are reflective of what the needs are to be able to satisfy that objective of the 8 can't wait. So we're working with that, and we'll update that policy and we'll resubmit that as well. So the comprehensive reporting piece is the 4th item that Sam was questioning as far as if our compliance and that we needed to continue working on. And I think we're very close. The concept of whether use of force, pointing a firearm, reportable as a use of force or a show of force, we have with our signal sidearm, which we've talked about before, which activates a body-worn camera as soon as an officer takes his gun out of his or her gun out of the holster. That has been issued to all officers, and that is currently in the process right now. So we also are having a requirement for the officers if their gun is physically pointed at an individual, that is reportable through that system, and that way we'll be able to completely track when an officer actually points his or her firearm at an individual. So we're still working on it. Our goal is to be 100% compliant with this. And you heard talking about our survey that's out there, that we want to make sure that 8 isn't enough, that what other things we can do. I do agree that we have to work on the 8 that we currently have, but there's room for both. There's no reason to say that we cannot get additional input. So we're going to be doing that as well, and we want to make sure that those replies are reflective on the community that we're serving. So we're trying to make sure that we get a diverse source of replies out there so that we can make a sound and judgment decision based on what the city of Charlotte would like to see. And I do want to correct something. Our signal sidearms, it is rolled out to patrol at this time. So we still have some work to do there, but patrol is equipped with the signal sidearms. So with that, that's as brief as I can get on the 8 Can't Wait response from CMPD. I'm sure there's going to be several questions, and I'll be happy to answer what I can.
All right, thank you, Chief. We've got a couple of questions on 8 Can't Wait, and before we get to those, I want to plant a seed with our committee members that we'll need to circle back to pretty quickly here after we get these questions on 8 Can't Wait. It's 1 o'clock now. I know we are about to lose one of our committee members to another obligation, and in about a half an hour, 15 to 20 minutes probably, we would lose another, which would put us down to 3 committee members. So I'm not looking for an answer now, but I'll be looking for an answer in about 10 minutes of whether we want to stay on with just 3 committee members and try to get to CMPD's presentation around training, as well as review the roles of the Civil Service Board and Citizens Review Board today, or if we want to push that to our next meeting. So Ms. Ajmera, Johnson, and Watlington, along with Vice Chair Mitchell, be thinking about that, and we'll make that decision after we get these questions out. I had one that the Mayor Pro Tem's having some technical issues, and just quickly wanted to have Chief clarify CMPD's current stance around subpoena power.
Yes, I appreciate that. I have seen that where reports of that we do not support subpoena power with our civil service. My stance on that is, I'm sorry, CRB. So my stance on that has been clear from day one of my swearing in, is that I do support subpoena power. I do think that it needs to be done reasonably. However, and when you start giving subpoena power, it's a very, very big responsibility to make sure that it's the integrity of that is upheld. However, I want to make sure that it's clear that my stance is that I would support subpoena power.
Well, Mr. Dawkins turned his camera back on just so he could clap for that answer, so I think that was the right answer.
I was wondering where that clapping was coming from. Yeah.
Mr. Newton, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep it brief. So I want to say that I agree with the general sentiments that have been relayed here, particularly as it pertains to language and how important language is. I did want to make a brief comment as an attorney that the word reasonable oftentimes leaves a lot of room for interpretation. So I wanted to just make that particular comment, but wanted to also ask, so I guess maybe this is building upon the Chief's comments just a second ago. Subpoena power has been a specific point of emphasis for us as a council, and it's been a major part of the conversation in the community. And I think rightfully so. The charge of our CRB is to review allegations of officer misconduct, and subpoena power gives the CRB the opportunity to investigate, to obtain information outside of what is otherwise provided to them, to answer all the questions before they have to make a final decision. It's also something that is afforded to the Civil Service Board, which is like the Citizens Review Board, comprised of citizens. Frankly, I think the qualifications for the Civil Service Board are less rigorous. So my question for Tanya is there more of an explanation or a reason why the group that you're a part of is against subpoena power? Can you provide a little bit more background and clarity on their position? Those folks who spoke against it, you said it was split.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't say like the entire group was against it. You have to also realize that our subgroups are basically 4 people per subgroup. And then with this, we didn't have necessarily an opportunity to report back to the entire group. But 2 out of our 4 members of our subgroup said they weren't comfortable with subpoena power. One is former Mayor Pro Tem Michael Barnes, and he said, basically he's an attorney. He understands the weight of subpoena power, and he says it's in your document that the convergence of statutory law, constitutional law, and case law, city code, and police department policy can create outcomes that vary widely from case to case and incident to incident. And so so that was his big concern around subpoena power, and he had a suggestion, as you'll see in your information and material, about possibly creating or appointing like an inspector general to investigate these types of cases. And that's also something that NAACP President Corinne Mack mentioned, was having a completely independent investigator looking into it, although Corinne Mack does support subpoena power. And then former CMPD was Vicky Deputy Chief?
Yep. Assistant Chief.
Assistant Chief, thank you. She said that her concern was that it was not going to necessarily get past the FOP was going to be part of the problem, and she was also saying that if you have subpoena power and basically officers come to the hearings, they have the option to plead the fifth anyway, so that kind of makes it moot to basically try and compel them to come and testify was one of the things that she pointed out. That part I don't think is necessarily listed in the information that you received, but I know that's one of the things she sent by email was that. And we on the Citizens Review Board do recognize that officers have the opportunity to plead the fifth if they're the people who are basically the subject of the investigation.
We can all agree that what's important is that the Citizens Review Board, just like any other board, has all of the facts at its disposal that it would need to make a decision, the most well-informed decision possible. So that's where my concern lies, and I really appreciate that additional information. Thank you, Tanya.
Sure. And also, can I just also want to add, especially when you all start talking about the Citizens Review Board in general, we would like to see also that the new duty to intervene policy be integrated into something that we can look into for the Citizens Review Board. Currently, we're only allowed to actually investigate appeals regarding use of force, firing of a use of a weapon, and conduct unbecoming is one of them as well. But the actual the new duty to intervene policy falls under a policy that we don't actually get an opportunity to investigate.
So you also get to investigate arbitrary profiling.
Yeah, that's the other one. I knew I was missing one. Thank you, Robert.
So the duty to intervene is under our neglect of duty. So I'm assuming you're asking to be able to review CRB review for neglect of duty as well?
Right, but I think that either you all would have to switch where you put the policy, or the city council would have to add that to our statute.
Okay, I think that's something we can discuss definitely and take a look at. So, but I do think also subpoena power for CRB is, and we look at it more. A lot of people are looking at it in order to compel officers for testifying, but also for citizens, because I know there have been some cases where we have not been able to get some witnesses that have been involved, that have seen in the cases that we're talking about, that CRB has not been able to get there. So I think it's going to benefit in that way as well if that comes to fruition.
That is correct. Yes, and we recognize that too. It's an opportunity to talk not only to officers, but also witnesses who are involved in the case.
And I would add, I think extracurricular documentation as well. So documentation that might not otherwise be in the internal affairs file.
Is that it, Mr. Newton?
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So I did get feedback from our committee members, and we are going to lose our quorum at around 1:15, which is less than 10 minutes from now, due to folks with other obligations. So we will have to bump the additional items on this agenda to our next meeting. And I do think, and again, I'll have offline conversations with the committee and figure out where we as a group want to strike that balance between trying to move quickly, but also continue to be effective. And I think that our input group is having to have that same conversation because they've just told us, you're asking us to deal with a lot in a short amount of time. And frankly, these are complicated issues, and they're issues that we're going to have a lot of questions and want a lot of answers on. And we've got to get it right. So I'll circle back with the manager and each of you to have those discussions and figure out how we want to continue to adjust our pace so that we can move as quickly as possible without sacrificing our effectiveness. Did anybody have any final questions on 8 can't wait? Because we're going to have to put a pin in it there. And I don't see any other hand. Oh, I do see Ms. Watlington's hand.
I just want to confirm that we'll just get another update as the work continues.
Do you mean on this specifically, or?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It can't wait.
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Mr. Chair, what I would like to do is once we have, we'll continue working with Sam, and my anticipation is that we will have 100% compliance or an agreement, or at least an explanation, and then we can come back before the committee and make that presentation.
That would be appreciated. Mr. Vice Chair, any final thoughts?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman.
All right, well,
Mr. Eggleston?
yes, ma'am, Ms. Ajmera.
Thank you. Chief, thank you for the presentation on 8 Can't Wait and also the Community Input Committee, very informative. I know at the last committee meeting, we had referred the audit update or the audit, CMPD audit topic to the Budget Committee, but that was not on the agenda. So Manager, could you please provide an update on that and whether that would be on our next Budget Committee agenda or not?
So thank you, Ms. Hashmera. So my understanding is that it was discussed a bit at the Budget and Effectiveness Committee meeting, but I don't think it was resolved whether or not it would be taken up. So I believe it's still in Budget and Effectiveness unless I've missed something.
Yes, so we did not discuss it at the Budget Committee meeting because it was not on our agenda. So would you be able to add it to our next committee's agenda?
But Budget and Effectiveness? I'm sorry.
I sent out the complete charge to all of the chairs as well as the council, and the chairs were to send me a schedule of the times that they're going to put the things that focus specifically on safety on the agendas, and they were asked to do that in the month of August, so that we would all be prepared for a preliminary report in September to the community around the work that's being done here in this committee, but all of the other committees that have community safety assignments. So if you don't have that chart, Ms. Ajmera, just send me a text and we'll get that chart back out to you today.
Sounds good, but I'm trying to find out whether in the report or the chart, does it include the CMPD audit for our Budget Committee?
It does. And it includes, it does include, that's what the chart includes. The chart includes every item for safety for every committee.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it will be on our agenda in August.
Well, I think you need to talk to the chair and see how he's outlined that to accomplish the task for August. I haven't heard back from the chairs.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. All right, so thank you again. Sorry for the folks whose presentations we didn't get to. This was an ambitious agenda, and not surprisingly, we wanted to spend a lot of time on each of these issues, and they each deserve a lot of time. So we will continue to improve our process here. I know the input group is continuing to improve their process, and again, we're greatly appreciative of all the time that all those folks are dedicating to helping us tackle some of these issues. And with that, unless there's anything else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. I'd like to make that a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Wonderful. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.